Hello. Hey guys, what's up? It's your girl Kay.
It's a boy, girl, Chai. Yeah.
And it's Rye. Welcome to Sweet Talks again. Yeah, if there are any of you out there. Last week we had a really fun conversation where Chai gave us like a deep dive into Japanese hip hop history. And that was fascinating. And that took us off on a lot of tangents about hip hop, cultural appropriation, if it is that in these societies, the hybridization of music across the globe. It was really awesome. If you haven't watched it, do it because it was great. And today we have a little bit of a different tune. Sorry, I was gonna make a joke about tunes and K-pop. Anyway,
you should have done it.
I kind of did by not doing it, and then saying I was going to. So I've leveled up. Today, the goal is to talk about something tangentially related, which is beauty standards in Korea, Japan, America as well. How we understand them as foreigners from East Asia, right? We're not actually there, and we weren't raised in that environment. Personally, I kind of want to start off by thinking about K-pop, in how a lot of K-pop idols are often asked like what their ideal type is, and their ideal types, pretty often it's like, oh, I want someone with milky skin, I want someone with a small face and big eyes, not to mention the like attitudes, I want someone who acts cute, who I can take care of, or someone who takes care of me. I'm just wondering, so as not to voice our perspectives above those in the Native communities, right? How about we address it from how it makes us feel as fans from the outside? So maybe when you, if you ever, look into an idol's ideal type and they say, oh, I want someone with like I said, milky white skin or a small face and big eyes, what is your first reaction to that? Maybe Kay?
Yeah, I was kind of already ready with an answer even before you posed that question, because that's been resting on my mind. Again, I like it to come from the perspective of where how can I relate to it before I begin to deep dive into kind of like the cultural nuances and like the societal nuances of it all. And quite frankly, just like simply being a person who enjoys that form of entertainment, I didn't necessarily find it problematic or a topic of like discussion or like further analysis in the beginning. Just being as a fan, but I feel like I'm older and I'm a little bit more wiser, and just looking in kind of like how having to revalue myself and knowing that like whatever social commentary that these idols make related to beauty standards, if I am not within the confines of their circle of beauty, then that's okay. And I shouldn't have to kind of uphold myself to that standard of beauty. And people are like, what are you talking about? Standards of beauty? Like, you should be who you are. Like, you don't have to conform to anything that you don't want to. But later on in this talk, we're going to further talk more, and I know that Rai and Chai definitely have more of a historical and cultural context to all of this, is that we do kind of consciously or subconsciously walk around with feeling that you may or may not be beautiful because of what someone has told you or what you have witnessed on social media, and being a fan of this huge this huge fan base. Quite frankly, there's millions of fans who, you know, they feed into these kind of descriptions or characteristics of beauty, that they tend to take drastic measures to make sure that they are suitable to their idols. And half the time, you know, it's just content. Like it's not real ideals of beauty, not real. Real, I mean, in terms of like their actual beliefs, but it's something to be said because they're also spewing these ideals for beauty and for ideals for women, and even male mannerisms, and how important it is to present yourself in a certain way so that you can feel accepted. And I think with this industry being so huge, and knowing that like you have to look a certain way even to be a part of it, but even to be someone that's viewed, you know, something more in the eyes of your idol, someone you idolize and you spend so much time thinking about and possibly dreaming about, and spending money on their products, their skincare products, their makeup products, whatever they choose to advertise in their ability to, because they are famous, says a lot about what we're going to be talking about today. Because not that I walk around feeling like my, you know, Jungkook from BTS is gonna love me, and because I have a certain look, and I have tattoos, and so I know he's gonna love me. Maybe Kayla, like 4 years ago, felt influenced by that, right? I mean, I'm only 24, but I mean, hey, in my mind, I was still in my mind. I know Jungkook call me. No, I'm kidding, because I'm in a lovely relationship, so do not call me. As if he has my number. But anyways, I'm saying that all out of, you know, jokes and giggles. But I think young women, specifically teenagers who are within this range of a following of terms of like these big groups, like they're the ones that kind of make their idol groups bigger than what they are, because they feed into it. They feed into like hoping that their oppa or their 언니 like looks at them and think they're beautiful and think they're wonderful, and they have no idea who they are. Oppa as in like, you know, your older brother or like boyfriend, and 언니 as an older sister. But I know Chai, you want to jump in on this, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to like be able to have the opportunity to answer the question before we end up moving too far before the question becomes irrelevant. Yeah. Oh, not irrelevant, but like my answer to the question becomes irrelevant to the conversation. Because I think for me, the first thing that I kind of like thought about when you asked the question obviously was my race. Because like growing up, at least in like 2012, or that era, you know, the Big Bang era, I was in that state of like, would these idols consider people like me, not necessarily me as Chai, but people like me attractive? Because being in America, like your race is very, very a center point for people like me. Like it's something that you constantly think about, especially when like for me, like I won't say the traditional Black person, but I wasn't the one who was like really into like hip hop growing up, or like whatever was the essence of Blackness of the time. I would do the dance, you know, like the WAP and Soulja Boy and all that stuff, chicken noodle soup, but like that was as far as my essence of Blackness came at, because I was the one listening to like alternative rock music. Like I can sing you all the songs of Black Veil Brides and Escape the Faith and things like that. And so when I was listening to K-pop, it was like, okay, like I know that this is all for like the Korean, at the time I was like, this is all for like Korean artists. So like it makes sense in my head, the way that I was thinking about it, that they wouldn't find somebody like me not necessarily not attractive, but like I wouldn't be the center point, because the audience at the time that I was looking at it was like, it's for them. in the same way that like there aren't a lot of white people in hip hop music, or at least like the hip hop that I know a lot of people were listening to. Like it was mostly Black artists. You had Black women in them. The center point or the audience was Black people. So I was like in my head at that time, at that age range, making that distinction in terms of like who is valuable made sense given the how I conceptualized the cultural context of the music. And then I got older and I'm noticing that K-pop, as you say, K, that is getting larger and is getting bigger, and you have so much different fan bases. I think I also grew out of that. Oh my gosh, would they like somebody like me? To like, okay, it's gotten a bigger fan base, and I'm noticing trends. We're seeing how Blackness is understood, or we're seeing how whiteness is understood. We see the beauty standards, as we're going to talk about today. We're seeing all the, the imitations or influences of other cultures in it. So what does this mean for, as they're getting a larger fan base and a larger popularity, as you say, Kay, like they're cultivating this image, but what does that image mean now that it probably is different versus like back then? Like, what is this new image? Or how should I put it? Let me take a step back. This image that they're cultivating, it seems that it's kind of the similar image that they had been cultivating since the beginning. So what does this mean for the maintenance of this certain image of idols for now that they have a larger fan base outside of Korea? And then that's why, like, I see a lot of people talking about, maybe not in terms of like ideal, I want my partner like this, but in terms of like what they find beauty or beautiful rather, making comparisons to like Beyonce or Rihanna. And those are like the staples or the emblems of Black beauty, for example, because I'm Black, so I can't say about like how they're seeing other races and other ethnic groups, but like something like that where like they're holding certain kinds of people onto a high standard and kind of making everybody fit under that. Like I like people like Beyonce. It was like there's not a lot of people like Beyonce. Not a lot of people. What about dark-skinned women? Something like that. Or like even thinking about like fatness. Like Beyonce is thick in Black standards, but like there are thicker Black women. So like what does that mean for that? And I'm not saying, I don't think any of us is saying that they have to date anybody outside of their race if they're particularly not comfortable with it, but just making sure that those preferences are not coming out of ignorance or out of stereotypes. I think that I just wanted to say that part because I think Kay, you was alluding to that because when you were saying like it's okay if they don't like somebody like me, and I think it's also okay. Like I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but making sure that the reason why you're not dating them, it's not because of a racist idea, taking Ebron X Kennedy's idea, but making sure that it's not coming out of a stereotype or ignorance or just like hate. And because I grew up out of that 2012 kind of phase, well, I wasn't really in the phase, but growing up since 2012, I'm understanding preferences a little bit better than I did when I was at that age. And I think that I'm still at that point where I'm like, I don't really care as much, but I just want to make sure that they're not liking Black people because of this, or they're not liking Black people because of this. It's just like, you like humans. And if you have a particular like, facial feature or something, okay, fine, whatever. I'm going to take a step back because I'm kind of rambling, but like, I just wanted to make sure that like I said that part, but I know Ryan, you want to jump in. And then I think Kay, what you were saying later on, I think was really, really important. I want to get back to that. I just want to make sure that like, we hear the different perspectives to your question, Ryan. But Ryan?
Yeah, that was so insightful and like eloquently put, Ty. I'm like, it brought up so many different things for me because, in case y'all didn't know, I'm white. And technically, if we were going to look at this, I hate beauty standards. I have such a bone to pick with beauty standards all over the world because they're fake. They're fake. I know like some probably racist scientists have tried to be like, our understanding of beauty is like biological. But no, they're wrong. And I won't elaborate. That is to say, if I was looking at the descriptions like milky white skin, first of all, milky, can we not describe anything that way, please? Disgusting. Milk. But also this idea of very pale skin or big eyes, relative maybe to the majority of Koreans, I might have bigger eyes, right? Or they might even only seem that way because of the double eyelids, right? Which we'll get into that history. But I might technically fit into those like vague descriptions, but I've also come to understand that those are aimed at Koreanness. There's like originally in K-pop, the intended audience was Koreans, right? It wasn't this big export originally that it is now. And those beauty standards were exactly the same back then. Well, not exactly, but largely the same then as they are now. So when people are saying those things, they're not thinking of foreigners. But that doesn't mean that if I were to go to Korea, which I have done, I wouldn't have different racialized experiences than someone who is Black and a foreigner, right? Because, yeah, I'm not Korean, and therefore I'm not that intended audience, that intended description. But I also do, like, fit into, like, the vague descriptors in that sense. So, like, I can be, and we might talk about this more, a little bit less visible in this society, right? I'll be notably foreign, but I won't be like I don't know, essentialized in the same way that maybe like a Black woman would be. And I think about how, yeah, my race is not essentialized. It's not like you're representative of white people, you know. But given that the beauty standards are made for and catered towards Koreans, that begs a whole nother question about understandings of like Koreanness abroad, because Hallyu is exporting these images of Koreanness that are these idealized pictures, right? And if you actually go to Korea, it's not like the majority of Koreans look like a K-pop idol. But at the same time, there is an attempt at cultivating a Korean image abroad, right? Through the images that they like allow to proliferate. And what does that mean for the people living, the people who are Korean, who also don't fit into those things, those like social hierarchies of beauty, and what, I don't even exactly know where I'm going, but actually maybe one of you could help. Okay, can you give some thoughts?
Maybe I might be able to like provide an example of exactly what you're trying to illustrate for us in terms of like this hegemonic or like singular look to Korean beauty standard. From an individual's perspective, you might be able to say that, like, me as a person, I will feel comfortable, you know, like mildly participating in like this social construct about beauty. That being said, I might buy some like skincare, right? I might like, okay, maybe I might take it up a notch and get some Botox, right? I'm talking from like a female perspective, but also we're going to learn later in our talk as well how like there are talks about how like femininity intertwines with like masculine beliefs or hyper masculine views, and I'm going to let Chai and Rai go after that because they have a better way of explaining it than I do. I'm also learning as we all are tuning in, but anyways, the kind of the way that I view what you're saying there, Rai, is that there are levels of participation in terms of like what people do to play up this role of like a particular look that's acceptable by Korean society. That being said, like fashion, once something is dropped in streets fashion in Korea, the next day you're gonna see everyone wearing it. That be say a back shirt.
Can someone explain it to me? Can someone explain it to me?
No, exactly. That's what we're trying to figure out, right? Like, where are these like standards, or like basically like who's ordaining these like profound ideas about what beauty is? And we talk more. You can see that especially within kind of like how we find plastic surgery to be quite more profound in Asia, and that being specific in Korea specifically for our sake, more so than in America, right? Like you might hear or see young Korean kids, age of 16, like, okay, it's my 16th birthday, I can go ahead and get my nose done. Or you might see signs and advertisements like on the buses and on the trains, just like, wouldn't you like to get a slimmer face? Or wouldn't you like to look younger than you actually do right now? These are kind of society's ways of saying, hey, like, participate in this thing that we're doing so that you can look beautiful for your job, you can look beautiful for your husband, you can look beautiful for the country, right? There's like this nationalistic view that the reason why you're doing this is just so that you can kind of fit the status quo. And I guess as Rai puts it, you can kind of look more Korean. There's a more defined look of what it means to be Korean, probably amongst other Asian countries as well, because I find that China has a very distinct look in terms of fashion, in terms of demonstrations of wealth. Even Japan. I don't know much about Japan, and I'm gonna let Chai jump into that because she's our expert here today. But I say that to say that there are like movements happening in these countries where or like significant events that has taken place in these countries where they find it profitable or a means of capital, that being human capital or cultural capital, meaning that you're able to tell people outside of Korea or outside of Japan that this is what it means to be Korean and why it's important to us. And then you have the physical capital, or monetary capital, excuse me. Physical capital is what I'm talking about in terms of like you being able to look a certain way. Monetary capital is more so like you're able to gain wealth or status doing so. So you can, excuse me, I don't know why my voice is sounding like this. I need help. You can like get a better job than other people because you carry yourself a certain way. And I think Korea does a really good job at making sure that like they push the envelope with their educational programs that like all people in Korea must be educated and have some form of education, that be through trading or like trade education or secondary school. Education is a big deal is what I'm trying to say. So that means that there is a lot of room for competition. So if everyone is all like achieving the same goals and having the same thing, what's another way to distinguish each other from one another? And that be beauty. The better you look, kind of the higher chances of you to be promoted or be the face of our company, or being able to represent our company in one way, shape, or form, organization, things like that. And there's a lot to be said about that. And I'm sure that Chai and Rai both have like some sort of analytical background, but just as a foreigner looking in, and like actually spending time in Korea and seeing these things unfold in front of me, they are real. Like, we're not just saying them just to be saying them. If you have a casual conversation with a Korean, and then, you know, the conversation sparks about like, it almost always like leads to conversations about relationships, or like where you come from, and like what does it mean to look like this when you, where you live, or what does it mean to live like this where you are from. These are things that really happen when you're having these intercultural conversations. So I hope you guys, you know, get from what we're saying. And I was hoping I was hoping that you guys can understand and catch my drift through this example. But I'm gonna let Chai go first, because I know you have something you want to add.
Thank you, Kay. There's a lot that you had said there that my brain was like going in all different kinds of directions. So I'm hoping that I can be succinct and collect them all. But the first thing that came to my head when you were talking about like individuals who participate in the beauty standards for, as you said, for different reasons, but like one is to like fix themselves, but also be presentable enough in their society to navigate the society, is I'm thinking about men in Korea, Korean men who wear makeup for that very purpose, even though it could be seen as like a feminine trait. Like, wearing makeup is by no doubt, at least in the West, considered a feminine thing to do. And in Korea, it was, at least before 1990s, because during that time, and we can even think about like in America, like is this similar things are happening now where like masculinity had to be redefined due to the economic crisis in the 1990s, right? So before that, for men, what it meant to be a man, or what the hegemonic masculinity meant, was that you were working outside of the house, being the breadwinners, and women were the ones who had the house, right? Like, they held down the house, they held down the kids, everything. And that, you can see that in Japan, you can see that in America, you can see that all over the world. Like, there was a distinction of the division of labor. But because of the economic crisis in I believe it was the mid 1990s, where because of that, men particularly, were living in precarious situations, and at the same time, due to feminist movements, and also because people were not able to live off of one income, women had to also participate in the market. The reason why this is significant is because it redefined what masculinity meant or looked like for Korean men. How makeup came into that was particularly interesting, because now they no longer needed, well, they still do need, but like, it was no longer an emphasis on being the breadwinner. It shifted from that to being, you got to look presentable to even get a job. Whereas before, you could just get a job because you were a man, right? Like, your masculine, like how you looked was not a definitive of your character. It was not a definitive of like how you were able to perform and work. But you taking care of yourself now, because of the economic crisis, made you more competitive, or made you better at getting a job. I hope I'm making sense in that phrasing, but like, you were seen as a better candidate for getting a job than somebody else who didn't look well or didn't keep themselves well. And what was interesting is that there has always been a Confucian value. I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, but Susin. I don't know Chinese. I'm so sorry. I don't know Mandarin, so I'm so sorry for those who do. I don't mean to disrespect the language, but I can spell it out so you know what it is. It's Susin, and that basically meant like cultivating oneself or one body. So it just basically, it was about like keeping yourself cut clean, right? Like making yourself presentable. How it looked before 1990s, I'm not too sure, but it it was clear that it wasn't necessarily tied or intrinsic to like your outer appearance. Obviously, you're not supposed to go to your job smelling, but there wasn't a heavy emphasis on like, you know, how you look. Like you didn't have to be handsome or attractive or well kept in order to get a job. Now, because of the economic crisis, there was much more emphasis on that. So that is also to say that like makeup for men became something that was seen as a corrective measure, meaning that if like for Korean men, right, in order for you to use makeup as a corrective measure, you needed to understand your imperfections. You needed to look at yourself in a way that your father probably did not need to look at themselves. They had to look in the mirror and really understand where are the imperfections were on their faces so that they can learn how to correct that. However, it's very important to note that the makeup, the use of makeup wasn't to be over exaggerated. Like if you think of queer culture or drag queen culture, it wasn't supposed to be like that. Like Korean men are not walking around with like green eyeshadow, right? The whole point of the makeup was to correct themselves, but to make themselves look ordinary. So they could be handsome already without like, you know, with the pimples on their face or whatever, but by hiding the pimples, maybe fixing up, contouring their nose a little bit, and probably putting on a little bit of color on their lips or something, made them not necessarily indistinguishable from another Korean person, but made them better looking. So obviously changing the hairstyle, making themselves look more cut clean. And so it still fits in that Confucian ideals, but now that Confucian ideals is interlocked with their outer appearance. And that allows them to still participate in the masculine culture or the hegemonic masculine culture without being considered gay. There are people who are still like, oh, men wearing makeup is a gay thing. But for them, it's like, no, it's not gay because one, it's for women, and meaning that like we're still straight, right? Like we are doing this for the gaze of the woman, but ultimately it's so that we can participate in the economic market and have a leg up in a way that we probably wouldn't have if we had went out without wearing makeup and have the pimples on our face. And we was talking earlier before we had gone on to the live that we were talking about like keeping yourself in a certain way links to your morality and your usefulness and your productivity. So if you didn't keep yourself up in a certain way, then you were seen as lazy, you were seen as unkept, and then people will make assumptions about you based off of that. And so because of, at least for men, they're participating in this female sector or what was known as a female sector. Even though they're participating in that, it wasn't to change their sexuality, for example. It wasn't to be like, oh, because we can't participate in the market, we're now gay. It was about we're participating in it so that we can still be men. And that is interesting. That's an interesting change that happened. That what you were saying, Kay, reminded me of that because it exists for both men and women, even though it has a different connotation to it or a different context. But for Korean men, like I remember, I don't know why I'm forgetting his name. He's like a famous dancer in South Korea who he dances for Sungmi, I think his name is. And a lot of people like him because he's hot. He is. But I will put his name in the chat, and then somebody who can pronounce his name could say it. I can't pronounce it. I'm really terrible saying Korean names. But I remember because I follow him slightly, and he was putting on makeup, and I was a little shocked, even though I knew that Korean idols at least wear makeup, but he was a dancer. So it's like, why put on makeup when you're going to be sweating it off, right? But as I'm reading like about like masculine culture in the necessity of makeup, it seems, it makes sense. Like he's hiding his blemishes, right? He's making himself more attractive. He's making himself more productive, more masculine, even if he's putting a little bit of like a smoky eye or hiding his dark bags or making his lips a little bit more pink. So I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to highlight that similarity between women and men in its relationship to breeding standards. But Rai, I know you want to jump in.
Yeah, okay. First, I want to say I'm sorry for my cat. She's all over today. But second, I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because I don't know how many Americans know that in Korea, when you're applying for a job, you submit a headshot. You have to have a picture of your face on your application. It's first page. So we as Americans know, even in our own society, that there are certain privileges that come with fitting the beauty standard, right? Cha Hyun-sung? That's the dancer. And these privileges that come with being, stereotypically beautiful, often relate back to histories of equating beauty with morality, and also with wealth and class and education, like everything that beauty doesn't really have anything to do with, because it's fake. I will die on this hill. But if you think about the process of putting your picture on the front of your job application, as if how you look is part of what makes you a good worker, makes you hireable, that plays directly into this feeling of, I need to look how society wants me to look, how people say I should look, how people say everyone should look. I know that a lot of people, and this is like not, I want to highlight that this is not an individual person's fault for following that that trend. That my cat is trying to get out. Give me 1 second. You can go.
Welcome back.
It's not an individual's fault that they are following that protocol, right? They kind of, it's self-defeating if you don't, and it's self-affirming if you do. So like you can only gain through following. You don't actually lose. It's much harder to get hired if your headshot doesn't fit the standard. If you have I don't know, a big face. I don't know what exactly that means, but that, yeah, they're often photoshopped as well. Like people pay professionals to Photoshop their headshot for job applications, and often men, if they have already gone to the military, they'll put a picture of them in their military uniform as their headshot. Then people are like, you did your service. And in the private sector, right, of just jobs, you have this pressure to assimilate to this idea of beauty so that you have more opportunities in life. Not only so that you can get a job, but so that you can have a more successful social life, whatever that may mean for you. And that permeates everything, right? If you set up this standard that that people feel obligated to follow, or rather obliged to follow, right? Because it's not even like they're thinking to myself like, I have to do this for my country, because I love X, Y, and Z thing about the job application process. They're doing it because they feel that they have to. And often if you are successfully assimilating into an idea of beauty, you're gonna be happy, because people will be nicer to you and you will be more successful, because the system is such that it made it worth it. But theoretically, it made it worth it. But at the same time, before you undergo any necessary changes to fit into that mold, there's far more pressure, right? Because you're aware that you don't fit into it. You look ahead and you think of, when I turn 16, like you said, Kay, maybe my parents will gift me a surgery. And I have to make sure that I diet or I do this or that before my photo so that I look my best, and then I have to pay this person, $500 to Photoshop me and make me look like perfect. And a lot of this is under the assumption that, like Chai said, we're taking care of ourselves. The expectation that you want to take part in the society, this is what we do. You are being an active participant. You are representing yourself as all of these like morally superior things. You are hardworking, you are clean, you are professional, goal-oriented, everything you need to succeed in a capitalist society. But there are just like this idea of like self-love and self-care, self-investment is used as a rhetoric for why you should partake in these methods of assimilating to the beauty standard. There's same arguments are used against it, right? And I want to acknowledge that here in America, in Korea as well, there are people advocating for self-love as a method for rejecting beauty standards. This, like, just because people in the society go along with it doesn't mean that they're not critical of it. And not everyone has to be critical of it. I don't think that that's like a standard that I'm trying to hold people to, obviously. But I just want to highlight that we in America tend to pathologize individual choices towards plastic surgery, in Korea in particular. Like with Miss Korea, like, oh, look, they all look the same. That happened a few years ago, where someone like put a whole bunch of pictures of the Miss Korea contestants together, and they were like, this is what, normalizing plastic surgery looks like. You have a lot of beautiful people, but they have one face. And that's often seen as like in a Western feminist framework, that's seen as like giving into oppression, and like some form of feminist failure. But I want to recognize that all over the world there are people making these opposite arguments using the same tools, like self-love and self-investment. And so this is not like a black and white situation. You want to say something?
Oh, no, I was just thinking.
I went way off.
No, you didn't. I think everything you're saying connects, and I think it was very important to share. I was just thinking, because you're thinking on like a larger like societal standpoint, and I was thinking about it like in terms of like K-pop, how like that also exists obviously in K-pop, like we all know, but like I just wanted to bring that out because of like many idols, obviously not all, because we could think of several examples of individuals in K-pop. I'm not talking about like K-hip-hop or the subunits where like they exist in defiance of K-pop in and of itself, but like K-pop as an industry, as a market, you can see that with like certain girl groups and younger groups, like one, they tend to be on the lighter skin tone, and they tend to be what we would consider pretty or beautiful, right? And like as you said, like the reason why I was thinking of K-pop specifically in terms of like the market and who they're marketing and who they're trying to use to, you know, perform certain kinds of songs and things like that, is when you said lid of like, why am I forgetting it? There's so much things. Something that you had said that I was thinking of like how not only are you seen as more productive if you are beautiful, but like they literally seek out a certain kind of image. And you can see that even with all the groups, they try to have like a different element to them, a different whatever thing that makes them unique. You could see that in terms of like the way that they're dressed, the way that they have to hold or maintain a certain body image, and then as well as like a certain kind of face, like a certain kind of like, or not even just like one kind of face, but just like a certain kind of skin tone or examples of skin tones. And I say that to say that like when you look at an average Korean versus an average K-pop idol, they kind of look different if you put them side by side. And it's not that one is better or worse than the other, but you can see that like K-pop, the point of K-pop, one is to exist within popular culture, but it's also a form of media. It's also regurgitating ideal standard beauties, or they're regurgitating beauty norms. And so even if the average Korean doesn't necessarily fit into that mold, they're still buying or they're still participating in that. And it's also a reciprocal process where it's capitalizing on what they think, or in terms of Korean markets, what they think is beauty, what they think is what's going to get people riled up and watch them. And they're picking people based off of that. Even if they're very, very talented, they could be demarcated because of their skin is darker. And you were saying that it's like being beautiful is a burden. That's why I was like putting in the chat, like theoretically you'll be happy, but at the same time it's a burden to uphold. And you can think of all the idols who have been suffering up until this point in order to uphold that beauty standard, because it's not just like we're talking about beauty standards in terms of face and skin, but it's also just like body proportions too. Like you got to be slim, and a lot of these idols are like dangerously thin, dangerously skinny, to the point where like they're fasting in ways where it should not be. It's not healthy. And they're passing out on stage, or, you know, God bless their souls, have committed suicide because of the pressure to maintain a certain weight. I know we talked a little bit about fat phobia. We didn't get into like much details, but like if you are just like a little bit over just an ideal, like even if you're going in the healthy range, if you're a little bit over and have a little bit of meat on your bones, you're considered fat. Right. And that's not to like, as in a Westerner, like being critical of that, it's like it's not okay. But within that, I want to say not only society, but in that market range, it's okay, because that is what's seen as profitable. That is seen as what's it's going to get other people not only wanting to buy in and try to mimic those beauty standards, but it's going to get people riled up. Especially if you think about like girls, like female idols, and the gauge is from males. And so the thinner and beautiful, whatever you are, the better you're able to be marketed to this group of people. And that's just for the woman. And I'm just thinking about like I want to think also about the men as well. And I see kind of two different kinds of beauty standards, if that makes sense, or two kinds of body types. Like you got the skinny ones, right? And the pretty boy skinny, and then you got the pretty boy face, but then like muscles, but not like crazy muscles. I ain't talking about like Jason Momoa muscles, but like muscles in a way, it's like lean muscles, right? Like Dorito body. I am crying. Yes, sure.
It looks like a Dorito.
Oh, yeah.
What they call.
I see it now. I see it now. No, yes, I see it now. Yes, it's something like that. And it's really, really fascinating to me because it's like, obviously, a healthy body is the best body. And what we considered healthy is culturally constructed. And sometimes we have a skewed understanding of what a healthy body is. And I'm thinking from like a fat phobic perspective. I'm not fat phobic. I mean, like, from like those who are fat phobic and considering those who are fat to be unhealthy, but then also thinking that being completely thin or like just like a pencil, I can see it as unhealthy, but people are seeing that as healthy or sexy or beautiful or whatever. And so there's a lot to be said just in terms of like K-pop in and of itself as a market that is producing these ideas of beauty that is then getting trajected into the society or merging with the society and their cultural understandings and norms. So, but I also maybe next time, because we are running out of time, we're about to hit the 1 hour mark. Maybe we could talk about whiteness and its relationship to beauty in Japan, because we didn't touch that as much. But I do think that there's a lot of juicy
than we anticipated.
Right, because there's a lot to be said about Japan, but I think there's a lot that I realize, well, we all realize can be said about Korea as well, and the beauty standards in society, as well as K-pop, but then also how it exists for both men and women together. I don't mean to wrap up. I'm just regurgitating that. But Kay, if you want to jump in, I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we had a very fruitful conversation, kind of like started off from our own unique perspective about where we find or have come across conversations of beauty standards even prior to our own knowledge of it, right? Like, we came from a very organic way of coming to this conversation, and I don't want to like say it like we're like force feeding our viewers to like think in this way, but I feel like there is a conversation or being had about this amongst like different members of the K-pop community or those who have traveled to Korea or Asia and having similar conversations. But we wanted to like project this idea only in the way of like educating and informing people of like where it actually comes from, and not just like in isolation to what other people's opinions are of it. So we've been trying to be very cognizant of the way that we are sharing our viewpoints. And with that being said, we will actually pick up this conversation, I believe, next week because of that great angle that our friend Chai has mentioned before about the presence of this kind of ideology in Japan, which is something new for me to learn about as well. And I hope you guys tune in. I think it would be very interesting, and I think it brings up a lot of questions, like many of these topics do. Like, where do these things that we're noticing stem from? And with that being said, I hope my folks out there have a lovely evening. Enjoy your Friday. Thank God it's Friday, y'all. And with that being said, have a great one. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to bring some peeps over. Like, we want y'all to make this a family thing. Please be sure to follow us on here, and we'll be here every week. So see y'all later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.